Hey guys, I'm Jackie, senior tutor at Prepped and Polished, and you're here for lesson 10 of grammar rules that you must know. We're actually going to do a 10 lecture circuit, so we're going to review the biggest concepts we went over in the last 10 lectures. If you really like the grammar lectures, that's great, and we're going to keep them going intermittently throughout the summer. Those dates will be to be announced, but right now we're going to recap those initial 9 sessions. What did we go over in the last few months? All right, guys, so let's get started. Okay, so as mentioned, we are going to be reviewing today. It's going to be broken into 3 sections. So the divisions are somewhat arbitrary. So when I say we're dividing it between punctuation, mechanics, and rhetoric, punctuation falls into mechanics. Those are the rules of the English language. But I want to separate them a little bit so they're in 3 kind of more manageable topics. So we're going to go over the most important punctuation rules, mechanics, so some grammar rules like misplaced modifiers, and then at the end we're going to wrap it up with rhetorical skills, so how to effectively write. All right, guys, so hopefully you remember these topics throughout the last few lectures. If we go to a topic and you think, I don't remember that well, go back and find the lecture that I was on and re-watch that, okay? It'll give you the opportunity to really review them with some depth, because today we're just going to go over the main concepts. All right, so as mentioned, we're going to start with punctuation. Okay, and punctuation can sometimes be a little bit frustrating, right? Why does it matter? What is the big deal about punctuation? Sometimes it's hard to make sure we properly use punctuation because it doesn't necessarily involve the words. In other words, just these little pieces, these small things punctuating might feel as though they're not important. Okay. So in other words, if you're thinking, can't the person just understand what I'm saying because of my words or the word order, it's not always true. Punctuation can affect tone, it can affect meaning, and it can affect what you're saying. So the reason it's so important is not to critically look at writing and say, well, this comma was out of place. The reason it's so important to know these rules or you want your clarity and meaning to come across as easily as possible, and that's best done when using proper punctuation. So, in other words, guys, the use of proper punctuation ensures that what you want to say is clearly conveyed, right? That there's no miscommunication or confusion about the ideas that you want to get across in writing. Okay, so not only affecting meaning, like I just mentioned, but also tone. We're going to look at an example below with the exact same words and correct punctuation in both scenarios. Okay, and we're going to look at how this changes the tone and meaning of the statements, even though they have the same words. This will help us understand why punctuation matters so much. Right, so example 1, the employees have always enjoyed working here, however. Okay, so this came after a statement maybe about something negative, even though, right, they've always enjoyed working here. In the summer, they have fewer hours and can have more free time, or they have more free time than they can even handle, right? So this sounds like best place ever to work, right? People always liked working here, despite what was just said previously. Okay, they've always liked working here. And then it seems like the next sentence is explaining some of the reasons they like working here. In the summer, it's the best. Okay. We're going to look at the same example now with the same words, and all we've changed is a comma and where that however goes. The employees have always enjoyed working here. However, in the summer, they have fewer hours and have more free time than they can handle. Okay. I know there's a little error in there, guys, that in should not be capitalized, but okay, if we look at the 2 situations, these are both grammatically correct. Okay, in the first statement, where that comma comes before the however, okay, is contradicting the previous statement. They've always enjoyed working here, however, despite that. Okay. In the second example, even though the words are in the same order, okay, the punctuation is slightly different. They've always enjoyed working here. However, despite that they enjoy it, right? In the summer, they have fewer hours and more free time than they can handle. We've also taken out the exclamation point at the end of that second sentence, which made it sound exciting or positive that they have a lot of free time. Here we've ended with a period, indicating the fact that they have few hours is actually something negative, right? We have our image here suggesting, they're maybe not making enough money in the summer. Okay, so same statements, we've changed a period, a comma, and an exclamation point, and the tone and meaning is very different. All right, guys, so the first thing we're going to go over is comma use. The reason I think this is one of the most important is you cannot write almost without using commas. It's an extremely versatile piece of punctuation. It's used frequently, and because of that, it's also misused frequently. Okay, so I want to look at when should we use it, what are their main uses, and then we're briefly going to just look at 2 examples of common comma errors. Okay, so we're going to start out with what are their main functions? What do commas do? A comma is used to clarify ideas, okay? So this is all about clarity, making sure your meaning is understood, right? There's no confusion. By creating separation between words, phrases, and clauses, okay? So here we've used commas in this sentence in a words in a list, okay? So this is a set of words in a list. Commas need to go between them. While the comma is versatile, like I mentioned, we often make errors while using it. So we're going to look at the 5 main uses of when we should be using a comma. Okay. So one thing before we start, guys, I want you to use these rules, right? So this is when I should definitely use a comma because it's necessary, or I should not use a comma because it is unneeded. Okay, as opposed to, should I pause here? Did I take a natural breath here? Did it just feel long? Okay, so in the previous lecture on comma use, we did talk about some of those misconceptions, right? It's a lot less definitive to think I'll use a comma where I would pause naturally, as opposed to I always know precisely when to use it and indeed when not to. All right, so let's look at those 5 uses. Right, the first one, after an introductory phrase or clause. Okay, so this could be a single word. We saw it in the previous slide. However, the employees in the summer. Okay, it can also be after a statement. Right, whenever I have lunch at my favorite place, comma. Okay, so an introductory clause. Right, with all of these long grammar lectures, we may never memorize all of the rules. Around non-essential clauses. Okay, another way to say that is parenthetical information, something that would come up in bracketed parentheses. Okay, so non-essential clauses are what we could say are offering bonus information, additional information that's not a necessary component of the sentence. In other words, if you want to check, is this non-essential? You can remove it from the sentence and the meaning should still hold. Okay? The other clue, like our example here, is those W words almost always start a non-essential clause, which will always be part of a non-essential clause, but also who or whom. Okay, so ketchup, which originated in China, was initially a fish sauce pronounced ketchup. Okay, so the core sentence, guys, without that bonus or tidbit of information about its origins in China, this meaning of the sentence still holds, and we still have a full sentence if we delete it. Ketchup was initially a fish sauce pronounced ketchup. Okay, the other key is if you're starting a non-essential clause, so you have a which statement or a who statement, right? So Queen Elizabeth, who was known for. Okay, if we're wondering where that second comma ends, okay, where do I cut off the non-essential clause? It's almost always right before the sentence's verb. Okay, so if we look here, ketchup, and then we have the core verb, was initially a fish sauce. Okay, so if you're unsure, you're kind of confused, make sure it's before the verb, or if the verb attached to the sentence's subject is inside the non-essential clause, you know you've made an error. 3, with an appositive phrase. All right, so I just want to go over appositives quick because it seems like they're non-essential phrases. They are sort of a square is a rectangle, rectangle is not a square type of thing. An appositive phrase is additional information about a subject, okay, or a noun, right? But this is a noun phrase that describes another noun beside it in the sentence. So in the previous example, which originated in China, this is not a noun phrase, okay, as opposed to here, our non-essential or additional information, okay, is an appositive or a noun phrase. Hermione Granger, okay, noun, and then the next phrase, the appositive, is another noun phrase that's describing her, a witch at Hogwarts, okay? So the phrasing, a witch at Hogwarts, as opposed to stating who is a witch at Hogwarts, that would be non-essential. A witch with that noun phrase is an appositive, is one of the top students in her class, and it's similar to the non-essential clauses because it is indeed one. We can delete the appositive phrase and still have a sentence intact. Hermione Granger is one of the top students in her class. Our fourth use, in between items in a series or list. This is one of the most common ones, guys, so you should feel comfortable with this. It also came up in our description of a comma, right, between words, phrases, and clauses. Okay, but we'll look at a quick example. I'd like to order a large pizza with chicken, broccoli, and extra cheese. Okay, so a list of 3 or more items. Okay, otherwise we just separate them with an and if there are only 2. Okay, and just quickly, when you're putting commas in between items in a list, the final comma is as an aesthetic choice. In other words, it's optional. You don't have to have it, but keep it consistent, whatever you choose. I do have a comma after or the last, second to last item in the list. Keep that consistent throughout your writing. Always do that. All right, and then last, our fifth use, with a conjunction in between 2 independent clauses, okay? So I can't stress this enough because this is one of the most common and important uses of commas, okay? And it's also where we create errors, where the comma splices occur, okay? So a comma, in other words, with a conjunction, a coordinating conjunction. We talked about those before, guys, those fanboys, for, and, nor, but, yet, so, okay, and or, I think I left out, right? If those come after comma, like we have in our example here, after Disney World, we have a comma followed by an and. That functions exactly the same as a period or semicolon. In other words, you have 3 acceptable ways to separate 2 independent clauses in the English language: a period, the classic choice, okay, a semicolon, which is identical to a period when used to separate 2 sentences, and finally a comma with a coordinating conjunction. So we're going to read this single sentence with the comma and coordinating conjunction, and then look at how it could also be separated into 2 sentences. Okay, so Kenny's favorite vacation spot was Disney World, and his favorite ride was Space Mountain. Maybe projecting onto Kenny a little bit here. Okay, so guys, this could also be read as, or if you wanted to separate it into 2 sentences, we could also say Kenny's favorite vacation spot was Disney World, period, and then we'd remove that coordinating conjunction, the and. His favorite ride was Space Mountain. Okay, if you're not sure if you're creating a comma splice, that's when a comma separates 2 sentences. Okay, read the text like I just did without the and. Are those 2 full sentences? All right, guys, so now that we've looked at comma uses, we're going to examine some of the most common mistakes, okay, that are made with commas. So as we just mentioned, the dreaded comma splice. This is one of the most misused, or one of the ways commas are most frequently misused. Okay, so comma splice simply means that you've incorrectly utilized a comma to separate 2 independent clauses. Okay. This most commonly occurs when one of those sentences, one of those independent clauses is short. Okay, so it's very brief, so it seems like, is it a full sentence? or really closely relates back to the sentence before. You feel like the ideas are so connected that they belong in a single sentence. Okay, so this is where you have to be careful. If you think the ideas belong together, you need to find a way to grammatically connect them properly. Okay, so here's an example where we have a brief independent clause. Okay, that makes it maybe seem like it's not a full sentence. I love to lounge on the beach and listen to the ocean. It's my favorite place. Okay. So here we have two full sentences. I love to lounge on the beach and listen to the ocean. It is my favorite place. Okay. While we have a pronoun in that second statement, okay, the beach is my favorite place, this is still a full sentence. It's still an independent clause. Okay. So either we need to add a coordinating conjunction, right, and it's my favorite place, okay, or we need to properly punctuate it with a period or semicolon. Here's one of those examples where it feels like these ideas are very closely connected. So then this is where we'd select a semicolon. It's not grammatically different from a period. It just indicates that the two independent clauses are closely connected in meaning. So here, I love to lounge on the beach and listen to the ocean, semicolon, it's my favorite place. Okay, another thing to note, guys, is if you don't want to change how that statement sounded previously, then you're going to select the period or the semicolon because the and would make it sound different, right? And it's my favorite place. The second part, guys, is what we call an identity crisis, okay, or we're modifying something incorrectly, okay? So commas should never separate, right? A modifier and the thing they modify. In other words, we shouldn't have commas between adjectives and the nouns or things they are modifying, okay? Especially or specifically when they're modifying a general subject. So we're going to look at an example where the commas are incorrect because the things they're modifying are so general. Okay? And then we're going to look at an example with specifics and why they are different. All right, so in this first example, we have commas around onward, okay, and before her friend Kayla. Alice went to see the movie Onward with her friend Kayla. Okay, so in actuality, guys, even though we have, another person, we have the title of a film, okay, none of these commas are right. You should just delete them all, get rid of them. Okay, so if you're wondering, more often than not, you're editing and revision, you should be deleting commas, taking them out where they don't belong. So why are these wrong? Okay, with the commas, right? They create a positive, right? So they create this phrase that's modifying the next thing. Okay. However, they are suggesting they are the only version. Okay, so Onward isn't the only movie in the world. So we can't say the movie Onward, right? With the comma because it suggests here Onward's the only movie in the world. Okay, and then tragically for Alice, with her friend, comma, Kayla, this would only be right if Kayla is her only friend. Okay, so the commas only belong if the modifiers can only specifically modify that thing. Okay, so in other words, if we added a detail about Kayla that's specific to Kayla, then the comma belongs. So we're going to look at an example, okay, but where we do make these descriptors more specific, but grammatically, guys, this should simply be with no commas. Alice went to see the movie Onward with her friend Kayla. None of them belong. Okay. Here, right, in our next example, we've given specific descriptors that make the commas correct because they are only describing the one thing that comes after it. In other words, Onward was not the only movie. Here, Onward is the only latest Disney movie, the most recent. Okay, so Alice went to see the latest Disney movie, this one's specific to it, so now the comma belongs, Onward, with her best friend and next door neighbor. Okay, now this is specific to Kayla only, so the comma belongs, Kayla. Okay, so when you're unsure, should I put a comma in between these? Okay, in between a modifying phrase or an adjective and the thing it's modifying, only if the phrase is specific to that singular thing. All right, guys, so there are more common mistakes than just these two, but these are the most common ones. If your commas are something that's tricky for you, go back and look at our comma use lecture. We go over a lot more misuses and some common misconceptions about commas. Okay, so our next apostrophes, this is an important piece of punctuation, and it's, again, like the comma, often misused, especially when trying to differentiate between plurals and possessives. Okay, so apostrophes have two functions. The first, right, is to show possession. Okay, so possession means something belongs to something else. Remember, guys, that when you're showing possession, it doesn't have to be with a living object and something that belongs to it, right? It could be a part of it. Okay, so we're going to look at an example of something that belongs to a person and then something that belongs to an inanimate object. Okay, both use possession. Okay, hand me Stacy's book bag so I can put the crayons in its front pocket. Okay, so here we have actually two forms of possession. Only one takes the apostrophe. We will talk about the its, that possessive pronoun in the sentence, okay, later on. It's an its. Okay, so here, guys, Stacy's book bag. Her book bag belongs to her, so we need the apostrophe s here. Okay. Right, and then in this version, okay, we have an inanimate object that has possession. Okay, don't stand too close to the mountain's edge. In this version, the edge of the mountain belongs to it, so this needs an apostrophe too. Okay, so both of these are showing possession. Its other function is to form contractions. Okay, so contractions are two words we've merged together, right? And the apostrophe indicates we have done that, right? That letters have been deleted, that something is missing. Trayvon didn't remember to bring his permission slip for the field trip, so he wasn't able to go with the rest of the class. Okay, so we have two contractions in this sentence, didn't, okay, and note where the apostrophe goes. It goes in the location that we've deleted a letter, okay, so instead of did not, okay, we have didn't, and the apostrophe belongs right in between the N and the T because that's where the missing letter is. Okay, similar below, wasn't, we've connected was and not, and we deleted the O, which is where the apostrophe belongs. Okay, so unfortunately, he's not going with the rest of the class. Okay, and then in one last example, if it weren't for the grammar lectures, I would know half of this stuff. Okay, it's probably not true, but weren't, were not, all right? So contractions, guys, need to indicate that we deleted something, something's gone missing. Okay, the other thing I want to note is when you're doing formal academic writing, I don't want you to have definitive rules like never use contractions ever, but they tend to render the writing less formal. So if you are writing an academic piece or something that's formal, it should sound kind of serious, you want to use as few contractions, if any, okay, as possible. So you want to try to not use them. In other words, you can take both these statements and remove the contractions, and they'll sound a little bit more formal. Trayvon did not remember to bring his permission slip for the field trip, so he was not able to go with the rest of the class, just sounding slightly more formal. All right, guys, when it comes to apostrophes, one of the most common errors comes with its versus its, right? They sound exactly the same, but they're written visually different. You are going to read the contraction, it apostrophe s, okay, as two words. This is going to help you differentiate between them. Okay, it is difficult to remember this grammar rule, and its frustrating nature is why some of us just give up on the rule altogether. Okay, so in this statement we have both our its, okay, the first being a contraction in this statement meaning it is, okay, and its, our second, is a possessive pronoun, okay, so a pronoun replacing a specific noun, and then possession meaning, okay, it's belonging to it. So our pronoun here is grammar rule, okay? Its is replacing that. So instead of saying, and this grammar rules apostrophe s, frustrating nature, we've replaced it with it, okay, the pronoun, and then added the s, okay? So if you look back at our previous example, when we had Stacy's backpack, okay, to show the backpack belonged to her, we had to put an apostrophe S. This is where the confusion lies, okay, because the possessive pronoun its does not have an apostrophe, okay. So, right, this means belonging to it, right? So, if we had a monster and it was his backpack, right, its backpack, it belongs to it, okay? So this one does not take the apostrophe because the priority in the language is the contraction, indicating we've deleted and changed words or letters, okay? So no pronouns that are possessive, their, your, her, his, none of them involve apostrophes. Okay. Versus it is, it has, or it was. Okay, so this is a contraction involving a verb. So in other words, guys, these are very different phrases, even though they sound exactly the same. This is why we often make mistakes with them. Okay. So if you're not sure which to use, right, so you're writing and I'm not sure if it's or its, okay, always read the it apostrophe S as it is. This is really going to make it sound wrong if the contraction does not belong, or it'll sound perfectly right and we'll leave the contraction. So fall is my favorite season. Its colors are rich and beautiful and the weather is warm but crisp. Okay, if we don't read the contraction as it is, that statement probably sounded just fine to you. This is where that error comes from, okay? So instead, we're going to read the contraction out loud as two words, which is going to indicate there's actually an error here. Fall is my favorite season. Its colors are rich and beautiful. Wrong, okay, error, doesn't sound right. So now that we've read the contraction as two words, we know it's not right and we can replace it with its, the possessive pronoun, with no apostrophe, okay? All right, guys, so that's the best way to double check, okay, to avoid making that error. All right, last but not least, colons and dashes. These ones have some relation, so this is why we're going over them together. They have some commonalities. Okay. All right, so dashes, these are used to create emphasis. Okay, a colon can also do the same. And it also functions as parentheses around non-essential clauses. So earlier we looked at commas going around a non-essential clause to separate it from the text. Dashes can do the same thing. Okay. Andrea's favorite movies, It, Friday the 13th, and Halloween were all horror flicks. Okay, so guys, similar to the non-essential clause we looked at with commas, if we delete the phrase in between the dashes, okay, our sentence still holds. Andrea's favorite movies were all horror flicks. Okay. So just know that these are interchangeable with the commas. You could just as easily have a comma after movies and a comma after Halloween. Okay. So why select dashes? Because we have a list in this non-essential. Commas might be a little bit confusing visually. So you can either choose to use the dashes or those parentheses, okay, those kind of little half circles around them. Okay. Or here in this second version, this creates emphasis, a dramatic pause. Okay, so if you're using a dash as a pause, the pause would be longer and more dramatic than a comma. The jurors reached a unanimous verdict. Guilty. Okay, so it adds a bit of drama and excitement to the writing because the pause is longer. Right, and then colons, okay, guys, one very important thing to remember about colons, they have to have a sentence preceding it. Okay, you need a full and complete sentence before you have a colon. So you'll never have a statement like such as and then a colon, okay, because no sentences end with such as. The other thing is the colon is a very interesting piece of punctuation that says things as opposed to just creating pauses or just kind of creating gaps and spaces between things and indicating meaning. Colons can say things like such as, right? So in this example here, there are 3 types of muscles in the body, okay, and then we put the colon This is saying or replacing which are, okay? Colon, cardiac, smooth, and skeletal. This piece of punctuation here says, okay, there are three types of muscles in the body, which are cardiac, smooth, and skeletal, okay? So you're never going to have a such as or for example. The colon itself is stating that, okay? All right, one more example that they both do. Okay, so both can create a pause before an explanation or some kind of revelation. Okay, a colon much more often is going to come than a dash before a definition or a kind of more technical explanation. Okay, right, so Brennan only had one thing on his mind when he arrived at the theater: candy. Okay, so like our jurors reaching the unanimous verdict, we could just as easily have the dash here, okay, a dash. All right, so in the only difference is one creates they both create a pause, okay. The colon suggests this is an explanation. It's an explanation of the thing he had on his mind. Okay, and then we're going to look at a plural. The pronoun should be plural. Freddie's parents believe that their son is slightly peculiar. It's okay, Freddie, we're all a little weird. Okay, and here we have a possessive pronoun. And note, whenever we have possessive pronouns, they do not have apostrophes. Okay, and then finally, guys, a place where gender will be relevant, where it affects, okay, the pronoun. Janet's mom, right, she's a woman, was always worried about how her hair looked. Okay, so her hair belongs to her. We need a possessive pronoun. Okay, and since it is Janet's mom, we know we need the pronoun her. All right, guys, so just remember when replacing, when using general nouns like this, okay, so you don't have to repeat a subject over and over, just double check and ensure they agree both in number and in gender, okay. Sorry about that verb agreement, guys, we don't have gender. Some do, right, Spanish, but not English, okay, just with pronoun agreement. Okay, and then last, guys, modifiers, misplaced modifiers, right? We're not going to go over a whole slide on dangling modifiers. They're almost the same, so we'll just discuss them in relation to these. Okay, so when you see modifier, again, it might sound fancy. This is typically just an adjective, okay, or a statement that is changing or modifying, okay, a noun or thing, right? So we have a statement, okay, a house. All right, it's blue. We have a blue house. That's modifying it, okay, changing it. All right, so a misplaced modifier, okay, this happens when a phrase or clause is placed incorrectly, awkwardly in a sentence. Okay, so either we're not sure what's being modified, okay, or it appears to modify something incorrectly. Okay, so we meant to have this statement or phrase modify one thing, but it's actually grammatically modifying another. Right, so let's look at an example of this. What does this mean? Right, so Neil Armstrong made history as the first man to step on the moon in 1969. Okay, so one of the issues here, guys, is they often don't sound wrong, okay, or it's easy to not recognize them because we know, right, what is meant, what information is meant to connect with certain things, okay? So you have to assume the people reading don't know, okay? So the issue is, right, in 1969, okay, this suggests, right, that Neil Armstrong in 1969, that year, was the first guy to go on the moon. Like, you know, they'd gone in 68 and 67 too, but that year in 1969, Neil Armstrong was the first guy, okay? However, what we meant to say, what we were meant to modify, isn't the first man to step on the moon. It's him making history. That's the statement being modified. Neil Armstrong made history in 1969, okay, as the first man to step on the moon. That's how we would correct that. Okay, so even though the meaning was probably clear, okay, it was incorrectly modifying the wrong thing. So he made history in 1969, okay, not first man to step on the moon in 1969. While that statement's true, okay, we don't mean in that specific year. The Girl Scouts went wild when they were told that they had raised $1 million by selling cookies at the troop meeting. Okay, so either this is the best troop meeting of all time, right? And those Girl Scouts made $1 million, right, at the troop meeting, just the one, or they went wild when they were told at the troop meeting that they had raised $1 million. Okay, so the at the troop meeting, okay, is actually referring to when they were told about it. Okay, so that modification should be after when they were told. The Girl Scouts went wild when they were told at the troop meeting, okay, that they had raised $1 million by selling cookies. Okay, so the most important thing with modification, guys, and being out of order is it changes your meaning, right? And with dangling modifiers, right, this is just at the start of the sentence, the thing being modified. So instead of at the troop meeting, a modification at the end of the sentence, or in a dangling modifier, the modifier just occurs at the start of the sentence. It's dangling alone. So this might be at the troop meeting, comma, right, something like this. Okay, that would be misplaced too. Our modifier would be at the start of the sentence, incorrectly modifying they raise $1 million instead. All right, so last but not least, guys, the third main category we're going to look at today is rhetoric and style. In other words, these won't do to make your writing clearer, stronger, and more effective. Okay, so rhetoric is one of the more difficult and advanced things we went over, especially because a lot of it is about aesthetic choices and making decisions, okay, as opposed to memorizing certain rules. Okay. So rhetoric, guys, if we remember, this is about effectively constructing your writing. What order should it go in? How should I state this? How many words should I use to state this? Okay, so these mistakes aren't necessarily grammar errors, but when made, they can render your writing weak, less persuasive, and blur or confuse your ideas. Okay, so especially that last piece, blurring or confusing your ideas, it makes it almost as important as grammar rules themselves. Okay, the most important thing when we're trying to express our ideas or opinions or information is that they're clear, that they can be understood. Okay. Right, so the first, redundancy and wordiness. Okay, these go together because if a statement's redundant, you've used too many words, okay, and wordiness might simply mean you could have cut down, used fewer words. So redundancy, we've repeated something, repeated information unnecessarily, okay, and that falls into wordiness, but wordiness, we've utilized too many words where we could have simplified, okay. So this is about clarity. If you can say things with fewer words, okay, and it has the same impact, okay, so, well, I could have said that really short, but it, would have lost all its gusto and excitement. That's not the same, okay, but if it's still impactful and still the meaning's clear, you want to use fewer words if possible. Okay? So it's kind of like, right, adding too much to a dish, right? We're overspicing, we're doing too much, okay? It's not soup, we burn the dish, right? The flavor's been muddled. The same thing's going to happen in your writing. Too much, throwing too much in, putting too much on top, okay? And suddenly the core meaning, that flavor, is overwhelmed and confused. Okay, so let's look at an example. The fact that the sun serves as a symbol for hope in all summer and a day can be seen as providing an optimistic narrative in the end of the story. Okay, so while it's not wholly unclear what's being stated here, okay, so the importance of the symbol of the sun, okay, and what it symbolizes, right, offers optimism, but this could be stated so much clearer, far less confusingly, okay, and even though there are elevated vocabulary, okay, they don't improve or enhance the writing. Okay, so do not just include complex words, fancy words, elevated vocab to do it, right? You want to select them meaningfully. So as often as you can, avoid finding a thesaurus and slapping in the word that seems the fanciest for your word, okay? Because context can also affect your meaning. Okay, so in this statement, we don't have redundancy. We haven't repeated anything, okay? But we've used so many unnecessary words, both big and small, that have really confused the core meanings. We're going to delete some of those and say the same statement with a lot more clarity and more punch. Okay, the writing sounds stronger this way. Okay, look how much shorter this is. In all summer and a day, the sun symbolizes hope, indicating society has the potential to change at the end of the story. Okay, so let's note a few things, right? This statement's briefer, it's clearer, it sounds a lot more confident, and it has additional details. Not only do we have the sun symbolizing hope, okay, but we've changed just optimism to potential to change a society. So we've added value to this second statement and made it shorter. That's the key to revision. This process should not happen as you write. Go ahead and write out your ideas, write a lot of words, too many, and then go back and revise. How could I change this? Okay. Right, and then we're going to just look at a couple, right? Maybe instead of this, we could replace it with this. Okay. So instead of considering the fact that, right, how about since? Because, okay? Because can be used at the start of a sentence, guys. It just has to be a part of an introductory phrase. Okay, so because because the sun symbolizes hope in all summer in a day, comma, the narrative indicates society has the potential to change. Strong statement starting with because, and it sounds a lot less confusing than considering the fact that all summer in the day, right, involves the symbol of the sun. Okay. It is possible that, right, may, can, okay. It is crucial that, must, okay, so singular phrases replacing these four-word phrases that say the same thing, okay, can be interpreted as, right, is, okay, this is also most important when you're doing a literary analysis, okay, so if you are talking about something that you're interpreting from literature, right, shift these can be seen as, might be understood as, to is. Okay, even though these claims are something that could be argued against, okay, you want to say it with confidence, right? So just say is, right? The sun is a symbol for hope, not can be seen as a symbol for hope. Okay, indicate you are confident and trust what you are saying. All right, guys, active and passive voice. This is the last thing we're going to talk about today, and we did discuss this in our previous lecture. This is so important because it can make your writing sound weak. Okay, the passive voice more often than not is something you want to avoid, but we will look at an example or two of when the passive voice is effective, right, and it doesn't sound confusing or muddled. Okay, so more often than not, guys, you are writing in the active voice. Okay, the subject's doing the thing. Okay, Jessica wrote the paper in 3 days. Jessica's our subject, wrote is our verb. Okay, she is doing the writing. Okay, this is active voice. It's the common construction we use, right? In a passive construction, so something written in the passive voice, okay, the object of the sentence displaces the subject, okay, and the object is the thing doing the action, right, to the subject. So you can see how, even just explaining it, it creates a kind of backwards and confusing structure. Okay, the paper was written by Jessica in 3 days. Okay, longer than our first statement and unnecessarily so. Okay, there is no reason we should state it like this ever. Okay, the paper was written by Jessica in 3 days. Okay, however, sometimes the object or the thing having something done to it is the core focus of the sentence, okay? So when that's the case, okay, the passive voice is a reasonable option, okay? When you choose the passive voice, more often than not, you want to remove the subject from the sentence, okay? And instead focus, right, on the object, the thing. Of course, it's going to be the subject in our sentence, but I'll show you the construction where it could have been the object. Okay. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Okay. There's nothing wrong with this statement. It's clear, it's concise, and indeed it's passive, okay? But we don't have the subject, who was passing it, to make the statement sound kind of confusing. Okay, so the Civil Rights Act is the focus, not the people passing it. So we wrote it, we constructed it passively. If we had the subject, it would still sound awkward. The Civil Rights Act was passed by government officials in 1964, unnecessary. Okay, so when we remove those doing the action and allow the Civil Rights Act to be kind of the subject, then the passive voice sounds fine. Okay. Construction on the Eiffel Tower began in 1887. Okay, so the focus here is the Eiffel Tower, not who was building it. Okay, so instead of including that subject, the construction on the Eiffel Tower began by construction workers in 1887. Okay, we remove that and we simply say construction began in 1887. Okay, so when you are discussing an inanimate object, and you want to talk about when it was constructed, what happened to it, this is when we might effectively use the passive voice. Okay, so whenever you're learning a grammar rule, throughout our lectures, when you look back, whenever you learn something, remember there is always exceptions. It's not to frustrate you, okay? But if you say things always never use the passive voice, then you've lost some opportunities to effectively talk about, say, these subjects below. So the key is, guys, when you learn grammar rules, you want to look into or be very cautious of never and always. Okay, so those comma rules we looked at, always, comma never goes before which, right? But the statement because can never start a sentence, as we looked at in the previous slide, wasn't always true. So look at those always and nevers with some skepticism and determine which are definitive. Which can I tell myself always? And where do I have to remember, wait a minute, there's actually some alternatives here. Okay, the reason you want to memorize them, like this alternative here, there's actually some effective ways to use the passive voice, is it gives you the most variety, okay, the most intricate toolbox to apply to your writing. Okay, often you can use a flathead screwdriver to twist something where you would want, okay, the Phillips head, right? But just because you can use that blunt object doesn't mean it wouldn't be better, more effective, okay, to use the correct tool. So the more tools you have, right, the more intricate your grammar knowledge is, the more options you have to really improve your writing. All right, guys, so as mentioned at the start of this lecture, okay, we are concluding at least this set of grammar sections. So we did a set of 10 lectures. If you've missed some or we went over a couple of rules today that you think I could use a refresher on, go back and review those other 9 lectures. Okay, so they're going to talk about these things in depth. And remember that grammar isn't something you learn and, right, because there's so much to memorize, it's something that you should revisit, re-look at. Okay. Otherwise, guys, we are going to intermittently hold these grammar lectures throughout the summer and continuing into fall, but they won't be on a regular schedule. They're to be determined. Okay, but otherwise, in between now and when we will hold that next lecture, if you're looking for individualized work, you're looking to work with somebody one-on-one, okay, go ahead and reach out, right? So online or give us a call. Otherwise, I can't wait to see you back here when we determine when that next grammar lecture will be. It was so great having you guys, and we'll see you soon.